Good morning. I'd like to call the Senate Finance and Appropriations Committee meeting to order and ask the clerk to call the roll.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Next, I would like each member to introduce him or herself and briefly state what your district represents. And let's start with Senator Newman.
Good morning, Madam Chair. I'm Steve Newman. I represent the Lynchburg area and go across and part of the northern portion of Roanoke.
Good morning, Madam Chair. I'm Louise Lucas. I represent the 18th Senatorial District that runs from Portsmouth down to Brunswick County currently and from Portsmouth down to Surrey County. But with the newly drawn district, it will be the first time ever the 18th Senatorial District will have been compact with just Portsmouth and Chesapeake.
I'm Emmett Hanger, Senator from Augusta County. I represent part of the Central Shenandoah Valley area and over east of the mountains, Greene, Madison, and Culpeper. If we want to talk about the new districts, I don't have one.
All right, I'm George Barker, and I represent parts of Alexandria, Fairfax, and Prince William.
I'm Janet Howell, and I represent parts of Fairfax and Arlington.
Dick Zaslaw, the 35th Senate District, that's somewhere in Fairfax County. And currently it's west end of Alexandria, most of Fairfax inside the Beltway between 395 and Route 7, a little bit outside the Beltway in Merrifield, and I've got the city of Falls Church, I think.
I'm Frank Ruff. I represent the 15th Senate District, which is much of Southern Virginia.
My name is Creed Deeds. I'm in the 25th District for the time being. We will not talk about redistricting.
Mamie Locke, representing the 2nd Senate District, which covers parts of the cities of Hampton, Newport News, Portsmouth, and a part of York County.
Jennifer McClellan, representing the 9th District, which you are in, so welcome. Parts of the city of Richmond, Henrico, the town of Ashland, and all of Charles City County.
Chap Peterson represents the 34th Senate District, which is Fairfax City, town of Vienna, central and western Fairfax, and will remain, but will no longer have Chap Peterson going forward. I'll be in the 37th Senate District.
Yes.
I'm Senator Dave Marsden, and right now I have the distinction, along with Senator DeSteff, of being one of only 2 senators in one political jurisdiction. I have a long, thin district from west to east in Fairfax County. It's so thin that everybody lives near it, nobody lives in it. Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Senator Adam Eben, representing the 30th Senate District in Northern Virginia, which includes eastern and central Alexandria, parts of Mount Vernon and Lee districts in Fairfax, and part of South Arlington as well. Thank you.
Good. Senator Edwards, I see you've arrived.
Yeah, I'm Senator, what's my name? Edwards. John Edwards from the great Roanoke Valley, formerly known as Big Lick. I represent Roanoke City, part of Roanoke County, part of Montgomery, and all of Giles County. 21st Senate District.
Okay, well, good morning again. As we begin our first meeting of the 2022 session, I would like to give some guidance and direction on the important work of our committee, especially our subcommittees. First, there are approximately 5 weeks before we report the budget. I will ask that members commit to working toward adopting a budget that committee members can support and that focuses on good policy decisions. Next, by the end of this week, all our subcommittees will have met at least once this year. We are working toward identifying the crucial issues in each area, and we will continue that dialogue. Subcommittee members should have comprehensive knowledge of matters before your subcommittee. Please work with staff members on any needed research and guidance. Subcommittee chairs, please make sure our staff know what you need to get the job done in your role as chair. And please conduct inquiries of agencies as necessary to fully understand the administration's position on spending proposals, amendments, and after this Friday, executive amendments. For your reference, I have redistributed the staff assignment list with areas of responsibility for each. I will note that Charles Kennington has left our staff to become a Deputy Secretary of Finance. Therefore, April will be covering income tax, Tyler will be covering sales tax, and Jason will be covering economic development. Turning back to committee organization, generally, bills will not be assigned to subcommittees except in the case where public hearings beyond the capacity of the full committee are appropriate, and in instances where the subcommittee must consider the totality of such bills, as those with the Woodrum Amendment. I will try to limit the number of bills assigned so that your subcommittee can devote maximum time to evaluating your specific areas of budget development. Additional guidance is included in the organization materials in your notebook. Please review these materials and make note of the committee procedures for acting on referred bills and guidance on consideration of tax incentive bills. The committee meeting schedule will remain the same as in prior years. Attendance at all assigned meetings is expected as your role is important to each. I will continue to be briefed by the staff weekly and will spend a great deal of time along with Senator Barker evaluating bills and recommend certain actions for your consideration. I may also decide to convene a resource or other special subcommittee as we evaluate the number of bills that are before the committee. I want to also note that we will continue the practice of not hearing additional public comment when public comment has already been taken in the committee of origin of any bill. Thank you in advance for your hard work and dedication to the committee during the session. If there are no questions, I'll turn this over to April so that the staff can start their presentation on the introduced budget.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let's see if we can get the PowerPoint up on the screen for you in just a second. I can go ahead and start while we're doing, there we go. I'm going to move on to slide 4 so that we can try to get through this quickly. Just a quick reminder that during the long session, you have 2 budget bills. The first of which we refer to lovingly as the caboose bill. Essentially, Senate Bill 29 is just by the time it goes into effect here for a couple of months in the current fiscal year, so you won't see as many amendments there. Senate Bill 30 is the next biennial budget, so that's for fiscal years 23 and 24, and it goes into effect on July 1, 2022. Just moving on, just to note, across the 2 introduced budget bills by the outgoing former governor, there are some key themes in proposed spending. There's a lot of money that's going into reserves. You might note we mentioned during the annual meeting that should be up to about almost $4 billion by fiscal year 2023. Well, another big theme, and to sort of gauge against what might happen in the future, is that the budget maintains liquidity and structural balance. And there's a number of items that do that. I'm not going to go into great detail so that the various analysts can cover that during their presentation. But some examples include there's significant cash for capital versus debt or bonds this time around. The budget proposes to eliminate the accelerated sales tax. There's a lot of one-time spending, especially in the first year. And then there's a voluntary VRS deposit, and the rates are kept at the same level versus going down. And then the revenue base exceeds the expenditure base. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. There are also some large investments in the public workforce. There are compensation increases that total almost $2 billion. That includes 5% pay raises in each year for state employees, state-supported local employees, and teachers. There are also additional target increases in areas that you spent a lot of time talking about back in August during the special session, mental health and public safety positions. And then there are significant investments in the areas of K-12, higher education, mental health, Medicaid, housing, and natural resources. Just quickly talking about the caboose bill, there is the additional general fund resources of $4.3 billion. I'm not going to go into a lot of those details. You remember there was a significant surplus of $2.6 billion. There are also some unexpended operating and capital appropriations as well, and there are then some requirements related to various funds. In the proposed budget, there are net spending increases of about $136 million. Most of those are for capital supplements. There's a deposit to the revenue reserve, some funding for business-ready sites, and then those are mostly offset by some savings in Medicaid. Let's go. This is just sort of the numeric summary, and then you can see that the balance carrying forward is significant going into this budget. And that's why you have to be cautious about what you spend in this biennium, just based on the fact that that one-time money is flowing through. This is just some quick points about the revenue outlook. Again, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but there are some net policy adjustments downward, and then large anticipated growth in 24. This slide, just slide 9, is just summarizing some of the policy changes that are baked into the revenue forecast, and I'll just quickly cover those so you're aware of them. There's funding related to, I'll skip the first one since it's not significant. There's pending legislation that Senator Boysko is carrying. This is part of the fiscal impact related to that. This is, there's a menstrual products tax exemption. Her pending legislation actually has another component related to personal hygiene products related to incontinence. There's the eliminating the accelerated sales tax on the next line of about $200 million. There's a refundable earned income tax credit that's tied to 15% of the federal earned income tax credit. And those are the costs there at the biennium, about $315 million. There's a one-time tax rebate, which is about $1 billion, $250 for single filers, $500 for married. There's the state sales tax on groceries, you see there, biennial cost of about $370 million, and then some changes related to tax conformity. So if you move forward to slide 10, here's a look at your resources available for appropriation. I won't, again, spend a lot of time on that, but it's over, if you look at the resources available for appropriation, over $60.9 billion, and then you'll see, based on the transfers and various other things, what's spent, and you get to an unappropriated balance of $149.4 million, which is unusual for there to be that much there. Going now to the big bill or the biennial budget, so for the next 2 fiscal years, it'll start on July 1. You'll see there's net spending increases of about $9.7 billion. So most of that, there's about $10.5 billion increase in general fund spending. That's mostly tied to the compensation increases, the deposits to the rainy day fund, the one-time deposit to the retirement system, K-12 rebenchmarking, updates in Medicaid, one-time funding for school construction, and funding in higher education. There's also some savings related to under K-12, and most of those are related to the additional lottery proceeds revenue, though I will note caution there as the gray machines are back, and then we'll have to track that revenue closely to see if that has an impact there. And then there is some removal of some additional one-time items, some Medicaid savings, and then some additional health care fund revenue, which goes to Medicaid for savings. I will note again, there's $2.5 billion in general fund cash and capital outlay. And again, that the unappropriated balance was about $150 million. And I'll just make 2 quick points. Even if you have strong growth in the next biennium, it's unlikely that it will result in the same magnitude of available resources. Again, because a lot of that one-time funding is coming through. And part of that was because the forecast got adjusted down. And so it just got missed significantly. So the same level of growth that provided several $1 billion, even if you had that same level of growth in the next coming biennium, it's only going to be about 1/4 of that. So that's important to keep in mind. So you have to be careful with the base adjustments in the current building, in the current biennium, and keep in mind that some of the savings related to the enhanced match and Medicaid will go away, and that there was additional federal funding flowing through to the states and to individuals. So structural balance and prudent investments will help mitigate any future concerns with aligning spending with ongoing resources. And then I'm not going to cover this slide because it's hard for me to read from here and probably hard for you to read in the slides. But this is just an update related to the American Rescue Plan under that state and local fiscal recovery fund. The capital funds are also in here, but you allocated those during special session back in August. And I'll just note that there's $424.1 million that's unallocated. So that's just for your reference. So, Madam Chair, if there aren't questions, I will turn it over to Jason to cover Commerce and Trade.
Are there questions? Okay. Jason, welcome.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair. Turning to slide 14, Commerce and Trade and the Caboose Bill. There's recommendation for one-time appropriation of $150 million for the Virginia Business Ready Sites Program. I believe Senator Marsden is carrying a bill, working its way through the process related to the topic as well. There's a proposal for $8.5 million for infrastructure upgrades at Progress Park in Wythe County as a result of an economic development incentive project that was endorsed by the MEI Commission. There's $1.5 million for the Commonwealth Development Opportunity Fund to offset language that required funding for J-Labs to be paid from the Commonwealth's Opportunity Fund. There is $6.3 million in savings included in the caboose to reflect a change in the grant structure for the shipping and logistics program, which moves it to a post-performance grant award. This just summarizes the actions in Senate Bill 30, which amount to net increases of 141.6 in the first year and 155.9 million general fund in the second year, which sums to a biennial increase of 297.5 million over the base budget. That is driven largely by a $190 million proposed deposit to the Housing Trust Fund. The next largest spending proposal is to reserve $42.5 million in each year to begin the process of setting aside cash to meet our commitments to Amazon under the Major Headquarters Grant Fund. There's required payments for custom economic development incentive projects that total $40.4 million over the biennium. There is $30 million proposed in the first year to capitalize a low to moderate income solar loan and rebate program at the Department of Energy. There's a proposal to spend $10.5 million to support Virginia's international trade plan. An additional $7.4 million proposed for the Enterprise Zone program, $7 million proposed for the Motion Picture Opportunity Fund program, and an additional $6 million over the biennium proposed for the Regional Innovation Fund at the Virginia Innovation Partnership Authority. The following slides are included for your information and summarize those major actions as well as the smaller actions at an agency by agency level. I'm going to just sort of skip through those and get to the itemization on slide 19 of the individual grant awards that are included in the summary number that I provided earlier. Turning to the newly created Secretary of Labor. The net actions in the Secretary of Labor are primarily base adjustment savings to remove one-time spending actions that were in last year's budget. Senate Bill 30 on slide 22 for labor includes the net reductions that I just mentioned, as well as an increase of $250 million in non-general funds, primarily driven by increased federal funding for the administration of the unemployment insurance program. There's also language included that would require VEC to hold employers harmless for pandemic-related claims activity when calculating UI tax rates. I know I went through it quickly. If there are no questions, if there are questions, I'm happy to answer them. If not, Jessica Dodson would like to cover higher education.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Senator Evan.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask if there's any good research. I know that in terms of the governor's motion picture opportunity fund, the budget proposes $15 million increase for that fund. And I've seen some studies that show that a lot of those jobs are temporary jobs for productions that come to town, as opposed to when you do the job-ready sites for or incentives for companies that are going to stay here and create permanent full-time jobs. Do we have any research on whether that's a sound investment of what kind of jobs those create or how long they last?
Madam Chair, Senator Evans. I believe we've read similar research, and certainly I'm happy to provide you copies of any of the things that I've seen overturned, but certainly that is a topic of meritorious scholarly debate.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none.
Jessica.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, moving on to higher education briefly. All right, just as a quick overview, we're seeing a total net change in higher education FY23 of $329.8 million in the first year. In the second year, we see $436.8 million. All major changes that were introduced in the higher education budget happen in SB 30. So among the major changes that we are seeing here, we have $209.3 million collectively to expand financial aid opportunities for students. We also see $194 million to restore and expand affordable access. You'll recall that last year there had been $40 million allocated overall to higher education institutions and affordable access funding. That funding is included in each year of the biennium, and it is doubled for each institution. However, for Norfolk State University and for Virginia State University, their allocations were increased to bring each to a total of $10 million in each year of the biennium for affordable access funding. We see $38 million in workforce innovation grants tied to G3, so that's for community colleges. We see $55 million total to support HBCUs. We'll go into more of that in a moment. And we see a total of $39.7 million for cancer research. There are $2 million allocations in each year for focused ultrasound. At 2 campus locations, we see an allocation at UVA, and also we're introducing programming at Virginia Tech this year. We see a $2.5 million allocation for VCU, and then the remainder of the funding goes to UVA Medical Center to continue their research, bringing UVA Medical Center and VCU each to a total of $20 million in each year of the biennium for research. In relation to financial aid, just as a breakdown here, we see that $150 million across the biennium, with a significant increase from the first year to the second year, is dedicated to undergraduate financial aid. We also see increases of $10.2 million for graduate students. We see increases in the size of the tuition assistance grant, up to $4,500 in the first year and $5,000 per student in the second year, for a total of $21.5 million. We see tuition assistance for federally ineligible students being introduced at $8 million in the first year and $8.8 million in the second year. Currently, data is scarce in terms of the number of students across Virginia who would be eligible for this funding, and so this is introductory. And then we see overall increases for the Virginia Military Survivors and Dependents Education Program of $10.8 million across the biennium. The Department of Veteran Affairs and SHEV anticipate that demand for these sources of financial aid will increase by 50% starting in fiscal year 2023, hence the increase. So this is somewhat difficult to read at smaller print, but just to briefly outline funding that has gone to support HBCUs. For Norfolk State University, I'd just like to point out the expansion of the Virginia College Affordability Network program of $2.5 million in each year. This is to expand the geographic radius around the campus for eligibility from 25 miles to 45 miles. And you'll see the same at Virginia State University. Other programming that's here is largely targeted toward student services. You'll see a combination of programs that are designed to increase academic advising, but also mental health services and wraparound services for students. Just to continue on to Virginia State University so that you can see their allocations. This is similar in terms of where the other additional programming funding is going. It's increased services for students. Additionally, the introduced budget includes money for Hampton University and Virginia Union University to expand on the VCAN model, going back to the 25-mile radius, with financial aid available for Pell-eligible students. Again, that's $5 million in each year of the biennium per school. Just briefly to touch on programmatic amendments within SHEV. We have Virtual Library of Virginia collections increases just to expand the amount of subscriptions and other resources available there. For the access to post-secondary and FAFSA completion, that's adding one person within Chev's staff to be able to deal with students and customer service with regard to increasing completion rates for FAFSA, et cetera. For increasing staff capacity, that's adding another 3 positions within Chev. For the open resources publishing, that is just increasing the availability of resources that can be used for higher education programs with higher enrollment numbers across the state. The Virginia Space Grant Consortium BLAST program sees an increase of $200,000 in each year to increase the number of students served to a total of 400 per summer. And then for the tuition aid and equity data system web portal piece, we see one additional person who's going to be responsible for managing and maintaining the web access system. And before we move on to K-12 education, I just want to touch on briefly the total amount of funding that went to individual institutions. For fiscal year 2023, we see $74.3 million in total allocations. That's including funding to the HBCUs. In fiscal year 2024, we see a total number of allocations of $68.9 million for a total of $143.2 million in additional investments. Can I answer any questions for the committee?
Are there questions? Don't see any.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, turning to K-12 education, I just wanted to remind the members that K-12 enrollment is down 3.6% still in this fall 2021 compared to 2019. We've seen a large uptick in students in privately educated programs or homeschool. And before the pandemic, we were expecting K-12 enrollment to decline. This probably just accelerated the decline. And last week, the K-12 subcommittee heard from UVA, which mentioned that a rebound in birth would it would still take a decade to reverse the K-12 enrollment loss that we're seeing today. Just moving over to Senate Bill 29 and the caboose budget. Senate Bill 29 includes a net reduction of $148 million in K-12. A lot of this is related to updating those enrollment or student characteristic projections. You also see the increase of sales tax revenue and then the lottery proceeds. The one policy action in the caboose budget is the supplanting of literary funds for general funds. That is just a swap. Previously, the literary funds were being used to support school retirement costs, school employee retirement costs, and that would make it be used with general funds. This is important because you can free up the literary fund now to do school construction, and you'll see that same action in Senate Bill 30. Turning to slide 34. Slide 34 just details the major actions in K-12 and the big budget. In the first year, it's an increase of $1.3 billion, and then in the second year, an increase of $1.1 billion. There are the rebenchmarking items. You'll remember rebenchmarking is lower because you have lower enrollment, and then you also have lower cost data inputted into the model. But on the second line, you see that the governor's proposed budget would hold harmless for those rebenchmarking data updates. This is related to the special education student counts, the non-personnel costs such as utilities, and then transportation costs. You'll also remember the governor's introduced budget eliminates the sales tax on food for human consumption. The governor proposes to hold the divisions harmless in this biennium for that increase. The localities would have to pick up that portion of the sales tax. That is $158 million over the biennium. There's a 5% salary increase each year for teachers and support staff. Divisions would have to provide at least 2.5% to receive the funds, and they'd have to do that in each year. There's $500 million for school construction and modernization grants. Each division receives a base allocation of $1 million that really supports the low enrollment school divisions, and then the remaining funds are allocated based on ADM. There's an increase to the at-risk add-on. You also see the supplanting of the literary fund for general funds to support the school retirement costs. There's the expansion of the early reading intervention to grades 4 and 5. There's several early childhood education actions. One would re-benchmark the VPI per pupil, which the last budget directed DOE to do. And then you also see the maintaining of the fiscal year 2022 VRS rates. Turning to slide 35, I'm not going to go in detail, but these are just the $50 million allocations to the nonprofit organizations that provide K-12 supplemental education services to divisions. Slide 36 just details the sales tax estimate, the elimination of the sales tax on groceries or food for human consumption, and then the hold harmless for the school divisions. Slide 37 is really just more detail about school construction. There's the $500 million grants. There's the authorization for the Board of Education to use $200 million of literary funds if they're available for school construction loans or subsidy grants. And then there are also modifications to the literary fund to make it a more attractive and competitive option on slide 38 for divisions to use. These were recommendations from the Department of Education and Treasury and then reaffirmed by the Commission on School Construction. Slide 39 just details the Department of Education allocations. The large allocations at the Department of Education are related to continuing the Virginia Kindergarten Readiness Program assessment for the pre-kindergarten expansion. This would allow more four-year-olds and three-year-olds to take that assessment. There's an expansion of the Office of School Quality. That was a JLARC recommendation from 2020. There's general funds to continue the support for the statewide learning management system and growth assessments, which you previously had used the federal K-12 relief funds for those actions. And then turning to slide 41 just details the other education agencies. One of the large increases I would point out to the committee is for the Jamestown Yorktown Foundation to support their 250th anniversary American Revolution commemoration. Madam Chair, that completes K-12 and other education. If there are any questions.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Senator Peterson.
Tyler, question.
Yes.
And I know this came at the Senate Finance Retreat, and this issue of families disenrolling children from public school systems. It looks like we've had a pretty consistent loss of 50,000 kids. Has DOE done any surveys? Have they said, why are people leaving? Is it a health concern? Is it a content curriculum concern? I mean, why are we facing, I mean, what do we know about this?
Yes. Madam Chair, Senator Peterson, the Department of Education, I don't believe, has done a survey. What we do know is that homeschool enrollment is up, so more parents are homeschooling their students. It's up 40% compared to 2019. And then there are some increases in private education as well.
Excuse me.
Yes, Senator.
I didn't, the increases of what?
Increasing to homeschooling.
Well, I know that.
Yes.
I mean, that's obvious.
Right.
Why?
Madam Chair, Senator Peterson, I don't know why, and I don't think the Department of Education is surveyed.
Well, I think somebody ought to maybe to pick up a phone and start figuring that out. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mike Tweedy is on Zoom, and he's going to come in, and I'm going to flip the slides for Mike.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
Great. So moving to slide 43 for Health and Human Resources, an overview of Senate Bill 29. Basically, it's a net reduction of $758 million for HHR. As we talked back at the annual meeting, the primary reason for this is the savings to Medicaid and the children's health insurance programs, savings mainly from additional federal assistance during the COVID pandemic, as well as decreased utilization. Healthcare fund, you can see there's $132 million in savings. This is mainly due to a cash balance from fiscal year 21, mainly due to increased pharmacy rebates, as well as repayments from the managed care companies for exceeding their profit caps, which they are limited by law. You can also see a few other things like $13.8 million for staffing overtime and pharmacy costs at state hospitals. So again, the ongoing issues at the state psychiatric hospitals and the pressures that both TDOs and the pandemic that they place on it. And another to note is there's $5.2 million for Eastern State Hospital's emergency kitchen. This is actually because they had a sewer line break. However, this was actually an ongoing capital project to replace that kitchen. So this just accelerates having another kitchen to use while they build the other one. Moving to, and you can see the other ones there, but moving to slide 44 for Senate Bill 30. You can basically see the net change for HHR over the biennium is about 1.7 billion general fund. So that translates into growth of about 9.1% in fiscal year 23 and 4.9% in 24. You'll see as we go through this that the large spending increases are the Medicaid forecast, which I've briefed you on before. We talk about Medicaid provider rates, and then lastly, behavioral health. Moving to slide 45, you'll see that this just gives you a brief summary by agency so that you can see, as you would expect, the largest increase is for DMAS. The next largest increase is about $330 million in behavioral health and developmental services. Then there's about $100 million, almost $100 million general fund for social services, and $70 million from health. So as expected, the four biggest agencies have the spending increases. Moving to slide 46, I just kind of highlight the Medicaid provider rate increases. So the second largest item after the forecast in HHR are the developmental disability waiver rates, which y'all may have heard some of this at some of the concerns about how it's being done at the public hearings. So this is almost $300 million. So the last time these rates were pretty much increased was back in 2016 when the waivers were redesigned. There's been a little bit of adjustment since then, but that's the major increase. So the intent here is to sort of kind of rebase their rates more to their cost. Of course, like many providers, the DD waiver providers are experiencing significant labor shortages and increased costs, just like everyone else is too. So that is a major issue for them. Primary care services are increased in the introduced budget to 80% of Medicare. You can also see there's a dental increase of 5% in the second year. As you recall, back in July 1st, Medicaid, the adult dental benefit was added to the Medicaid program. So this is an attempt to recognize that the providers do need increased dental rates, which they haven't been increased since 2005. You see there's a 15% increase for OB and gynecological services. There's also a 30% increase in vision services for children, which haven't been increased for a long time. And then for psychiatric residential treatment facilities, there's language that creates a 3-year rebasing cycle for their rates and provides annual inflation. And so in total, you can see there's $338 million for provider rates. Moving to slide 47. Just to summarize the DMAS forecast, like I said, the Medicaid and children's health insurance programs are the largest cost in Medicaid, but they're pretty normal forecast. So there's also $39 million to add 1,200 development disability waiver slots. That's 600 slots per year. And there's also a variety of other smaller things that you can see here as well. Moving to next slide. Community behavioral health, you can see here there's about $128 million. You can see the major thing is kind of fully funding Step Virginia. So this adds the last 3 services. It also adds additional funds for infrastructure needs and regional positions to oversee the program with the CSBs. That's about $50 million. You see permanent supportive housing, which also includes an additional position for oversight. That's $34 million over the biennium. This actually would fund about an additional 1,250 slots of people with serious mental illness to give them stable housing. It also includes a provision specific to pregnant women. So it adds an additional 75 for that. There's crisis system transformation. So this funding, the first year funding of $2 million looks low, but it's because $20 million is in the back of the act related to ARPA funds. So it's really $22 million per year total. This continues to fund conversion of existing CIT centers to receiving centers, as well as improving the mobile crisis system. Then there's $6 million for the next phase of implementing local Marcus alert programs. This adds an additional 5 localities. And then you can see there's the other ones on the list too, some smaller ones in community behavioral health. Move to the next slide, 49. Behavioral health facilities, this is probably one of the bigger areas of growth in DBHCS. So as you recall back from the special session, direct care staff at the state psychiatric hospitals, they're having a very tough time with retaining and recruiting staff. So the special session had included ARPA funds to give them bonuses. And then in fiscal year 23, the ARPA funds supports increasing compensation for the direct care staff to about 75% of the market median. And for your reference, their current rates are roughly about 10% of market median. And then you can see the ongoing general fund cost of $80 million per year, beginning in fiscal year 24. There's 10.2 million for a pilot to expand therapeutic intervention services and discharge planning. So this would be at Central State and Southern Mental Health Institute. Currently, they only do discharge planning and provide therapeutic intervention Monday through Friday. So this is the idea that to provide them on weekends as well, so that they could potentially expedite people leaving the facilities to relieve the census pressure. And you can see other smaller things with security staff and overtime and pharmacy costs at the state hospitals as well. Moving to slide 50, there's a variety of other items that I'll just touch base in a few. There's 2.2 million per year in general fund for recovery residences for people with substance use disorder. There's 3.8 million for the state rental assistance program that provides rental subsidies for people in the DD waivers. It's fully funding the alternative transportation project at 3.8 million. So this will ensure going forward that the alternative transportation for TDOs is a 24/7 operation statewide. And the last one I'll just note here is the 3.4 million for alternative custody options for temporary detention orders. And this is certainly a topic that is being discussed a great deal. What the introduced budget does is that in the first year requires development of a plan that in the second year there's 3.4 million provided for it to kind of implement these alternate custody options. And of course, the intent is to relieve the burden from law enforcement so that they can go back out on the road. The last item on this slide is basically just to note a study of the behavioral health system. There's 1 million in the first year for the study. And interesting enough, in the back of the act in central accounts, they reserve $100 million for implementing the results of that study in the second year. Moving to slide 51. These are just a variety of administrative items in DBHS. There's quite a few. So it's things like discharge assistance planning, as well as systems to monitor it. A lot of funding to upgrade their information technology systems, electronic health records, and you can see a lot of other administrative items there. Moving to slide 52 to the Department of Social Services. But the largest item here is 40 million for the foster care and adoption subsidy payments. This also includes the cost of living increase, which is typical after a state employee raise in the following year. By law, the Commonwealth has to increase adoption and foster care subsidy payments by the same amount. I noted here the Child Support Information System. This is all non-general funds, but just to note that that's a major system, about 40 million that they're moving to upgrade. There's also 17 million to supplant TANF-funded discretionary programs. I know the members of the HHR subcommittee know very well that we talk a lot about TANF funding every year. So what this introduced budget does, that I think with the additional general fund dollars, they're trying to relieve the TANF program from some of that burden to make sure that it's structurally balanced going forward. There's also other systems, such as replacing the Virginia Case Management System, which is where they do Medicaid and public assistance eligibility, and the child welfare system as well. And the last one I'll note here is there's also 8 million for the Office of New Americans for a benefit navigator pilot program. So this is the idea where the office provides assistance to, a lot of this I think is the focus is on Afghan refugees to provide them assistance with resettling, housing, as well as legal assistance. And you can see there's a variety of other things in DSS as well. So moving to slide 53, the Department of Health, they have quite a few items, so I'll just note the big ones. The first one here, 16 million, is the e-referral system for public and social services. This is something they've kind of already developed in the past 2 years during COVID. And so it's a system where basically to try to connect people with other community partners to provide, whether it's public or health services for people. So it's just a way to try to connect them to all the different community supports that exist out there. There's 8.5 million that completes the 3-year phase-in, which we started last year for the local match changes. So this is kind of updating the whole local health department match, which had been updated for, if I remember correctly, something like 50 years. So this we were doing it over a 3-year process. There's also 4.4 million related to funding marijuana prevention and education, then 3 million for a water sampling verification program at the Office of Drinking Water. Like I said, and you can see a variety of other things in BDH as well. Moving to slide 54, you can see there's funding 1.4 million for the Ask Childhood Cancer Foundation. So this is to provide additional assistance to families when they have a child under cancer treatment. There's 1.4 million for the state match for the drinking water revolving fund. And database, so this is to attempt to maximize the amount of money that we get from the federal government for drinking water. There's also 1.1 million for the Virginia Health Workforce Development Authority. And you can see a variety of other items in the health departments that are much smaller. Moving to slide 55 and the other HHR agencies, just to note, aging and rehabilitative services. The big item here is there's an increase in public guardian slots of 5.3 million. This was the result of the JLARC study that basically recommended increasing the number of those slots. They also have things like 1.2 million for the Virginia Insurance Counseling Assistance Program, which basically provides assistance to seniors, mainly to understand Medicare. Then 1.2 million to help boost the Adult Protective Services regional staff, and a few other items there for as well for DARS. Then for blind and vision impaired, just to note, there's 1.6 million for their vocational rehabilitation program, which is the workforce services program for blind and vision impaired individuals. So moving to slide 56, this is the last slide, just in CSA, just a few very small administrative items. Then in deaf and hard of hearing, creation of a deaf mentor program. And then lastly, there's language that continues a primary care task force in the Secretary of Health and Human Resources. So with that, Madam Chair, that concludes HHR. So if there are any questions.
Are there any questions for Mike? Okay, next. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Good morning. Moving to the budget for Public Safety and Homeland Security and Veterans and Defense Affairs. So just quickly on the caboose, what I'd like to highlight here is there's a requested increase in inmate healthcare cost at the DOC secure facilities of $6.8 million in FY22. This pairs with a request in the big bill. So they're requesting there an 11 million increase in FY23 and a 9.5 million increase in FY24. This is to reflect updated projections, but the proposal for the big bill also includes 276 positions in the first year and 432 in the second year to support the department's transition to a fully in-house model. So currently there's about 40 secure facilities that they manage. 13 are part of a comprehensive healthcare contract. And the plan is to phase out that comprehensive healthcare contract between FY22 and 24. So that's reflected here in the caboose and in the big bill. Moving on to an overview of SB 30. Overall, there's a net change in general fund of $178.5 million in FY23 and $186.3 million in FY24. So just a few things to highlight for Department of Corrections. The biggest thing here is compensation for security staff. As you all know, in the special session, the General Assembly directed a public safety officer compensation study. This is one of the proposals that came out of that. So this is $85.2 million over the biennium, both to increase minimum salaries for correctional officers and to increase for security supervisory staff accordingly. There's also some adjustments based on compression, based on length of service and rank. And so that's the biggest request at the Department of Corrections. There's the inmate health care item here that we already discussed. Another item here is mental health and cognitive counselors. So this is 73 positions total. About half will be for psychology associates in secure facilities, and about half for additional cognitive counselors in probation and parole districts. This expands the current program from 6 districts to provide access statewide. A couple lines down, the budget also includes $5.7 million over the biennium for 47 additional probation and parole officers handling cases for individuals on the sex offender registry. These can sometimes be more intensive cases with monitoring and other treatment options. And the last one I'm going to highlight for the Department of Corrections is $7.1 million over the biennium for continued implementation of the earned sentence credit legislation that was passed in 2020. The earned sentence credit legislation, the releases under that will begin this coming July 2022. So this annualizes 74 positions that were previously provided to prepare inmates for release, and then also includes about 50 additional probation and parole to help with that increase in reentry due to that retroactive element of the earned sentence credits. Moving on to the Department of Criminal Justice Services, the biggest item here is a proposed Virginia Center for Firearm Violence Intervention and Prevention, totaling $27.4 million over the biennium. The intent here is this has accompanying legislation that you'll see But the intent here is to have 13 full-time staff and 3 part-time staff to provide data collection, research, assistance to localities for capacity building, awareness campaigns and training, things of that nature. And then it also includes $10 million in each year for grants that will go out in 3 buckets. So essentially those buckets for the grants are $5 million for community grants for gun violence intervention and prevention. This is somewhat similar to funding previously provided in FY21 and FY22 for gun violence prevention. And then there's also a couple grants, $2.5 million each in each year for firearm suicide prevention grant program and the firearm removal grant program, part of which relates to law enforcement training relating to substantial risk orders and protective order execution. A few other items just to briefly highlight at the Department of Criminal Justice Services are $1.5 million in the first year for big heroes and minorities in every society. There's also $1 million for pre-release and post-incarceration services, largely focused on reentry. And then $1.5 million each year. First year is ARPA, second year is general fund for the Marcus Alert, so that pairs with what Mike just presented on. Moving on to the Department of State Police, their increases total $63.7 million over the biennium. Again, the biggest thing here is the compensation proposal coming out of the work group from this past fall. So this includes an increase in the minimum salaries for sworn employees, 7.7% at each rank, which would bring the starting salary for a state trooper to $51,500, and to establish a pay scale, so with separations between years of service, but then also additional increases for moving up the pay scale at pay bands. The other item here is case records and management systems, $14.5 million over the biennium. This upgrades and replaces their computer-aided dispatch systems that deals with incident response, and then also their records management system, what we would typically refer to as police reports. It's their records management system. Just a couple things to highlight at the Department of Emergency Management. As you all know, their budget is mostly federal funds, but they do have a few general fund items. The largest is $1 million each year to convert positions from non-general fund to general fund. They've been notified the federal government will no longer support these positions, so they're requesting to keep those as general fund positions. The other thing actually to note for VDEM is they are proposing to continue $21.1 million in the base budget for COVID-19 activities that they expect to be ongoing. And then for other public safety and homeland security agencies, the biggest one here is the Cannabis Control Authority operating budget. The governor's introduced budget proposes $11.8 million in the first year and $21.7 million in the second year to really to get that agency going up to its full operations. That comes with about 70 positions in the first year, 116 positions in the second year, and also $6 million for the Cannabis Equity Business Loan Fund. Under the legislation passed last session, as you all know, the Cannabis Control Authority would start accepting licenses on July 1st, 2023, and then legal sales would begin on January 1st, 2024, but portions of that legislation are subject to reenactment. And then there's just a few other items here for both the Department of Forensic Services to keep up with caseloads, and then also some non-general fund items at ABC. Moving on to Veterans and Defense Affairs, there's a proposed general fund increase of $19.3 million in FY23 and $6.6 million in FY24. For the Department of Veterans Services, the largest item here is $5 million in each year for a proposed suicide and opiate prevention program, building on some of their current efforts, but expanding that. And then they have funding nearly $5 million in each over the biennium for new positions. This is 17 positions across multiple service areas, including the Virginia Military Survivors and Dependents Education Program, the Virginia Values Veterans Program, and veteran service representatives and resource specialists across their offices, as well as some other program areas. Finally, for the Office of the Secretary of Veterans and Defense Affairs, the budget proposes $10 million in the first year for a new state grant program called the Virginia State Military Communities Infrastructure Program. This would support infrastructure projects in the community that enhance military installation resiliency, environment and research and development capabilities, as well as improve the quality of life for military communities on those installations. This also has accompanying legislation requiring a 50% non-state match. So this grant could be used to provide localities with matching grant funds for federal grant funds, such as the Department of Defense's Community Infrastructure Program.
companion legislation has been introduced. And then the last thing I'll highlight here is $1 million to increase the National Guard tuition assistance program. Companion legislation would also change that from a direct upfront award to students to a reimbursement model to improve certainty. With that, I will take any questions.
Are there questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Madam Chair, picking up with agriculture and forestry on slide 69. The proposed budget for agriculture and forestry increases funding in the Secretariat by $18.8 million in the first year and $10.8 million in the second year, summing to $29.6 over the biennium. The major spending actions include increased funding for support to the urban and community forestry program, $5 million for VDACs to support funding at the farmland preservation program, $3.2 million to reestablish the New Kent Nursery, $2.9 proposed for the Agriculture and Forestry's Industries Development Fund, $1.9 million is proposed for legislation that would create a new Virginia Spirits Promotion Fund to accompany legislation making its way through the session. $1.4 million is proposed to enhance recreational opportunities in Virginia state forests. The table here on slide 70 itemizes those actions individually. I will note that there are a couple of compensation-related recruitment and retention proposals for environmental specialists in the Office of the State Veterinarian, and a couple of additional positions proposed within the agency. At the Department of Forestry, on slide 71, this itemizes those proposed actions as well. I would highlight that there is a smaller individualized actions that sum to slightly north of $2 million for emergency response radios and for response capacity by the Department of Forestry. Those individuals are also on cooperative agreements that respond to forest fire events around the country. Turning to the Secretariat of Natural Resources, House Bill 29 actions would increase funding provided to the watercraft sales and use tax, which results in a reduction of available general fund revenues of about $3.9 million. That proposal is continued into the big bill and reduces annual general fund revenues by $1.8 million. That reflects the sales of watercraft, bullets, and other hunting equipment. There is capital outlay authorization in Senate Bill 29 proposed to provide the one-time funding for Claremont Barn from the insurance recovery funds. This is non-general funds from the settlement. Turning to the big bill, the introduced budget contains net increases totaling $224.3 million over the biennium. There are a lot of savings from one-time actions that are in the current budget in Chapter 552 that offset increases. The largest increase is $339.5 million over the biennium for the Water Quality Improvement Fund, which includes a discretionary deposit of $26.5 million in the second year. There is $181.2 million in non-general fund proceeds from participation in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative that is provided at DCR for the Community Flood Preparedness Program and at DEQ for program administration. There's also RGGI funds that are appropriated to the Department of Housing and Community Development. There is $22 million proposed for land conservation. Of that, 12 is specifically dedicated for tribal land acquisition program that would be established. There is a deposit of $17.6 million to the Clean Water Revolving Loan Program to match anticipated additional federal revenues under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. There is $10 million to establish a new preservation program for archaeological sites associated with Black, Indigenous, and peoples of color. There's $8 million proposed for staffing and compensation-related actions, primarily at DCR. And there is more than $212.5 million in general funds in Part 2 capital outlay authorizations, again, primarily at DCR. There's also $100 million proposed in capital outlay for deposit to the Stormwater Local Assistance Fund. This summarizes the actions by year, and these tables, beginning on slide 76, summarize the proposals individually. There are certain operational costs that fall below the major spending initiatives. For example, There is a million, $500,000 each year proposed for state park maintenance. There are the costs to bring newly renovated projects online, such as the New River Trail Inn at Foster Falls. There is funding in the second year to fund the operations of Machicomico State Park, as the Skiffs Creek settlement money will be expired. Again, itemizing the small actions across DEQ, there are certain specific proposed appropriations for regulated entities and localities, such as $3 million proposed for the town of Dumfries for MS4 permit obligations, or the $300,000 proposed for stormwater activities in the town of Occoquan. Turning to historic resources, there's the $10 million proposed for the Black, Indigenous Peoples of Color Preservation Fund that I mentioned earlier, as well as several smaller one-time initiatives in the first year that sum to $6.9 million for grants to historical institutions. That is a roll-up number. I certainly have itemized details at your request. At MRC, the major general fund spending initiative is $1.5 million for the Chincoteague Inlet study. I believe the committee has heard about this the past several years. With respect to the Water Quality Improvement Fund, of the $313 million that is the statutory deposit included in the first year, there are $44.6 million in off-the-top earmarks. Within that, there are several new things that have appeared on the off-the-top list. That includes the Small Herd Initiative, MS4 regulatory support programs for newly regulated localities, and the study of the Shenandoah River harmful algal bloom. If there are no questions, I'll turn to transportation. Within transportation, Madam Chair, there is a significant general fund proposal of $209.4 million. I would note that the proposed decrease there in the first year is the technical removal of the $55 million that we provided in Chapter 552. Those actions collectively will provide around $230 million to the Bike Trails program as proposed. Senate Bill 29 includes $115.8 million as the statutory deposit to transportation programs as set out in 2.21514 from the surplus. That would be allocated as follows: $30 million for the Mid-Atlantic Regional Spaceport to support capital improvements that are tangentially related to a proposal that may become before the MEI Commission. There is $25.8 million to support the Bike Trails program, as I mentioned earlier. There's $20 million to support the Air Terminal Interchange project in partnership with the Navy, $20 million for improvements to Interstate 64 between exits 205 and 234, $10 million to the Priority Transportation Fund to replenish funding that was allocated for other purposes as part of the 2021 Transportation Initiative, and $10 million for projects to remediate the loss of wildlife habitat impacted by transportation projects in Hampton Roads. It also increases VDOT's appropriation by $647.5 million non-general funds in the current fiscal year to reflect the revised Commonwealth Transportation Fund forecast and anticipated revenue increases in federal formula funds from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. When you move into the big bill, that action ripples through. VDOT's appropriation would be increased by $741.2 million non-general funds in fiscal 23 and over $1 billion in fiscal 24 to reflect those two actions. I will note there is a technical amendment required. The introduced budget did not reduce funding appropriated at VDOT based on tax policy decisions that were made after the budget was developed. It would be technical in nature, and it totals to about $200 million. There is a proposed one-time deposit of $207.2 million for the planning and construction of multi-use trails. The language in the amendment specifically identifies trails in Central Virginia, the Eastern Shore, and the Shenandoah Valley. It establishes an appropriation for the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority from existing funds that total to $621.8 million over the biennium, and it establishes a new pass-through entity to provide a better accounting of the $1.8 billion that is provided to the regional transportation authorities in Central Virginia Northern Virginia and Hampton roads. There are several language amendments in transportation to reflect changes required under federal law and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act with respect to things like the Bridge Rehabilitation Program. Language is provided that directs VDOT to develop a plan. With respect to the National Electric Vehicle Program, there is language requiring directing VDOT to develop a plan that focuses on public-private partnerships. There is new appropriations for the PROTECT program and for the carbon reduction program that were included in the federal bill. There is language related to JLARC recommendations directing a study of city street maintenance payments. As with respect to other transportation programs, there is a proposal to replace the state's King Air 350 with a new plane, and there are non-general funds appropriated to reflect anticipated revenues from the sale of the existing aircraft. There is language at DMV to exempt manufacturers of buses for public transportation from licensure requirements. There is a proposed increase of $2 million general fund in each year and $2 million non-general fund in each year for the Port Opportunity Fund. And their port's non-general fund allocations are increased by $18.2 million and $29.6 to reflect increases in debt service and lease costs. The major port proposal to capital improvement project is included in capital outlay. I believe Tyler has a slide. No questions? Adam Rosatelli.
All right, moving into general government, beginning with the caboose bill. Overall proposed amendments to FY22 total $554.1 million general fund and $1.4 million non-general funds, and I'm not going to go through all these in the interest of time. Obviously, there's a voluntary supplemental deposit of the Revenue Reserve Fund of $564 million, and you'll see in SB 30 the Constitutional Rainy Day Fund deposit of $1.1 billion as well in the first year of the biennium. There's also a proposed reversion of $33 million in criminal fund balances in the courts due to lower than expected costs in the current year. There's also language authorizing the state employee raise in the second year or in the next biennium due to the effective date of that. And this just summarizes all of the actions that are contained in SB 29. So going into employee compensation, a lot of the targeted actions were already covered in some of the other areas, but again, there's a 5% in each year rather for state employees and state-supported local employees. The state side, that includes adjunct faculty and graduate teaching assistants. Teachers were already spoken to. There's 5% in each year there as well. And then about $307 million in targeted compensation actions, some of which were already spoken to with regards to state police, DOC, sheriffs, deputies and regional jail officers, DBHDS Mike spoke to, magistrates, DGS, and then on some of the other smaller initiatives that were all throughout the other areas of the budget. Not going into great detail on the targeted compensation actions. Again, these were covered, but the state police, 48.4, correctional officers, 85.2. Deputy sheriffs and regional jail officers, I don't think that's been covered yet. So their salaries would increase from $35,149 to $42,000. Again, just like the other employee groups, there were work groups that were put together to address this and the other areas. So there had been a proposal among the work group to potentially go to $44,000 and then some other actions that aren't reflected in the governor's introduced budget. But in here, there is $42,000 starting is what it would go to, and then there's a compression component of $100 per year of service up to 30 years. And that's $89.5 million over the biennium. Looking at some of the other areas again, Mike already covered the direct care associates for magistrates. Apparently the courts are experiencing some recruitment and retention issues among the magistrates, so that would increase their salaries to $54,000 and then have adjustments based on performance and tenure for the existing magistrates there. That's $8 million. In the Division of Consolidated Laboratory Services for scientist positions, there's also a proposal to increase those salaries as well, just based on a market study and where they are relative to their counterparts in DFS and the public and private sectors. And then state mail services, there's a small amount to adjust the salaries there just based on the responsibilities that they've kind of acquired over time. Going to judicial, there is 58 million general fund over the biennium increase and non-general fund $1.2 million. Looking at some of the items individually, there's $15.7 million for 120 general district court positions proposed. This is in addition to in FY20, I believe we provided 120 positions, and we also increased civil filing fees to $36, which generated about $3.9 million in revenue to partially offset the cost of those positions when they were added. So with this 120, that would put them within about 40 positions, I think, of what their staffing standards would suggest they should be fully staffed at. There's $4 million related to a state bar positions. They contract through the Legal Services Corporation of Virginia, and that would be for salary enhancements for the legal aid attorneys that they contract through. And then there's $300,000 to add a judgeship in the 31st district, and that's a recommendation of the Judicial Council. Looking at executive offices, total proposed amendments result in a general fund increase of $7.5 million and $1.6 million in non-general funds over the biennium. Just a few items of note here. There's $800,000 in 2 positions to support the Cannabis Equity Investment Board, $1 million and 4 positions to increase the language access efforts promoted by the Governor's Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, $400,000 in 2 positions in the Ombudsman, and then $900,000 and 4 positions for consumer data protection. There's also a small amount down at the bottom related to dues for Virginia to join the Southeast Crescent Regional Commission. Going into administration, total changes, $199.6 million general fund and $195.5 million non-general fund over the biennium. Already spoke to the sheriff's salary initiative. There's 89.5. Next, there's $37.7 million related to meeting jail new minimum mental and behavioral health standards in jails. Those are adopted by the board. And specifically, the funding would add 249 behavioral health case managers and 250 partially funded medical and treatment positions under the compensation board staffing standards. And that's consistent with a report that was done in 2021 that recommended some of those standards and staffing proposals. There's $10.7 million to annualize a lot of previously funded that were in Chapter 552 staffing and compensation initiatives throughout the comp board. $1 million circuit court clerks technology fund that would fully replenish the technology trust fund for them, so it's no longer supplanting their general fund operations there, so that's fully supported. And then you can see a reduction of $21.5 million in jail per diems based on the local and state responsible offender forecast. Few other items. There's an expansion in DCLS to expand bioinformatics and sequencing, and that would be 7 positions and supplanting some federal funds that are expiring to continue those activities. And you already see the staff salary increases were spoken to, as well as state mail services. In elections, there is $2.5 million related to public education and outreach. There's a little bit of HAVA backfill for security software, and then 4 program and administrative related positions are proposed to be added. First line, you see general fund appropriation for the legacy personnel management information system funding. The internal service fund component of that is being canceled in central appropriations, given that it's no longer the system of record as the Cardinal HCM system fully becomes operational by the end of the current fiscal year. For data and organizational analysis type positions in DHRM to do workforce analytics and other activities for the agency. And some other smaller items. I will say there's a one-time expense to look at the executive job and pay structure for state executives. And then a variety of non-general fund actions totaling $178.3 million, and that's where you see all your VITA expenditures that are all non-general fund ISF-funded activities. In finance, $959.5 million increase in the general fund and $58.5 million non-general fund over the biennium. Again, the bulk of that is the $1.1 billion rainy day fund deposit in the first year. April spoke to this already, but the combined amounts of those by the end of the FY23 would be about, I believe, $3.9 billion. And there's also language included in this portion that overrides the statutory provision with respect to the 15% cap on the combined balances of both the rainy day fund and the revenue reserve fund. Couple of items here. There's an adjustment for debt service for authorized bond issuances, 191.3 for VPBA and VCBA debt. Moving on, there's 6.5 million related to 3 relief bills and some smaller items there, and then 56.2 million non-general fund actions related to mostly Cardinal Financials and the human capital management applications and property insurance, cyber insurance premiums constituting the majority of that increase. Central appropriations, general fund increase of 486.3 million and 877.1 million in non-general fund over the biennium. Again, looking at that, we already covered the 5% in each year for the state-supported employee pay increases. Mike spoke to that 100 million in the second year related to that study that in anticipation of things that would be proposed in the study that has yet to take place. You see on the next line, there's just mostly benefits adjustments here. You can see the general fund share of VETA rates, that 60.7. I guess just a couple of items of note. The state employee health premium increases reflect increases of 2% and 2.5% in the second year. The actuaries said they should be 6%, so the health insurance fund that has a pretty healthy balance is actually going to absorb a good portion of that increase that otherwise would have been reflected as a general fund increase there. So, and then for VRS employer contributions, $27 million. That reflects increases. The board adopted rates for JRS, Valors, and SPORs. If you recall, the state and teacher rates actually would have gone down. So for us, it's essentially budgetarily neutral. So those are kept flat. And Tyler spoke to the teacher side on that on the SOQ portion of his presentation. And just a few smaller items here. Again, that shows the ARPA allocations, the NGF. There's a little bit in the tobacco settlement fund that would be additional youth tobacco use and childhood obesity prevention and reduction activities through the Virginia Foundation for Healthy Youth. And it looks like there's about 400 left unallocated after the 873.8 million, which reflects a continuation of things that were done in chapter or in special session 2, and then new items in the state and local fiscal relief fund, and then other ARPA grants that are the SLRF. And I believe that concludes my portion of the presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Are there questions for Adam?
Nope. All right. Thank you, ma'am.
I got plenty of
Turning to the last section, capital outlay. As April mentioned, most capital outlay spending was done in general fund cash. So in the caboose budget, there's 211 million in general fund cash. This is mainly to supplement previously authorized projects for material cost increases and the prevailing wage. Moving into Senate Bill 30, there's 2.5 billion proposed in general fund cash, and then the remaining in non-general fund cash or 9C or 9D revenue bonds. Slide 108 just details how the cash breaks down across the categories of projects. Most of the general fund cash is for construction or existing facility improvements. And then slide 109 just details the cash a little more detailed. So there's 100 million in Senate Bill 30 for supplements to previously authorized projects. There's 914 million approximately for higher education in the capital construction pool. There's 522 million approximately for standalone construction. Not surprisingly, a majority of this is for higher education, but there's 112 million at DCR for state park improvements, and then 45 million at DCR for Soil and Water Conservation District dam. There's 354 million for Central Maintenance Reserve. There's 283 million general funds over the biennium at the port. A large portion of this is to enhance the northern portion of the Norfolk International Terminal. There's 112 million approximately for state agency capital construction in a pool. There's a $100 million deposit to Stormwater Local Assistance Fund. There's planning money for state agencies and higher education institutions. There's 32.9 million to continue those tech talent, thus the Amazon capital and equipment projects at higher ed institutions. And then there's 31 million for furnishing and equipments for capital projects that are coming online in the next 18 months. And then, Madam Chair, before I complete, I just wanted to let members know behind the slides are the K-12 distributions by division. And to Senator Norment, those have now been posted on the committee's website for school divisions to see. And Madam Chair, that completes capital outlay. If there's no questions, I think we are done with our presentation.
Madam Chair, if you don't mind, I'd like to just make a few quick announcements. All right. Just so the members are aware, by noon today, you will receive electronically those budget amendments that you individually filed as the patron. They're going to be coming to your offices by noon electronically. There'll be instructions in that email on how to respond. The turnaround for those changes, as is typical, is by 5 p.m. today. And you can send them directly to the email that'll be in that email that's coming to you individually. I will say, though, however, if you do have questions, please don't hesitate to call our offices, call individual analysts, et cetera, so that we can make sure we get those corrected for you, and those will go live tomorrow. The other comment I wanted to make, the document, the summary that we do, the staff does to summarize in even more excruciating detail than what we gave you today, is done and is posted on our website in the state budget page. And for members of the committee, you receive a hard copy, and those will be coming to your office today. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. Madam Chair, you also asked that only for the Thursday meeting at 4 p.m., where we'll be covering patron amendments, you've asked that only non-committee members come and cover those amendments. So that will be here Thursday at 4 p.m. Tomorrow's meeting should be brief. I've probably jinxed it, but there's only a handful of bills as well. So that concludes the announcements that I had, Madam Chair.
Thank you, April. Is there any more business to come before this committee? We have our work laid out for us. I'm sure we've all absorbed all of these numbers and are ready to revise them, but the committee will rise.